Hit me.
From Studio P in Sausalito, the home of the hit, it's time for...
Succotash.
Yes, Succotash Chats, the original comedy soundcast featuring interviews from comedy...
Soundcast.
Soundcasters, comedians, soundcasters, and other showbiz folks. And here's your host, internationally recognized Comedy Soundcast Soundcaster, Marc Hershon.
Yes, it's me, Marc Hershon, your host and 100% genuine cowhide casual travel jacket for Epi148 of Succotash, the Comedy Soundcast Soundcast. Your ears are staring down the barrel of another Succotash Chats show, this time around featuring my conversation with podcast pioneer, yes, I'm using the P word, wait a minute. Have you rated Succotash yet up on iTunes? Because that's a move that can really help us out in terms of new people finding us. Just go up to iTunes right now and give us 5 stars along with a few sentences about how Succotash has changed your life for the better. Go on, we'll wait. All done? That's great. I really appreciate it. Anyway, as I was about to say, the show this time around features my conversation with podcast pioneer, yes, I'm using the P word, Jimmy Pardo. I've spoken with Jimmy a couple of times while I was at the Los Angeles Podcast Festival over the years, but this is the first time I got to yak it up with him mano a mano. We talk about his Never Not Funny Soundcast, now in its 11th year, and how he was one of the first guys to cast his line out into the Soundcast pond. Here's a taste.
The podcast, the comedy podcast boom hadn't happened yet. So I and Matt, we were like, well, why are we doing this? We kind of felt like, yes, we have a loyal fan base, and yes, we're having fun doing it, which, by the way, are 2 great reasons to do it. So it sounds like I'm bitching about something, but it was still kind of like, we kind of felt like losers doing this thing like on cable access, like just some stupid show that, like, why are we doing? Why are we playing pretend radio for these people? So we said, let's try doing a pay format, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, we'll bail on this thing because podcasting isn't taking off anyway.
There's a lot more where that came from coming up very shortly. We also talk about his 8th upcoming Pardcast-a-thon, 12 straight hours of live soundcasting for a good cause. And although he won't come right out and say who his guests are, he does hint around enough that you should be able to get a good idea of who's going to drop by to help him out next Saturday, March 4th. More details on that in the interview. Elsewise on this edition, we have an installment of our Burst O' Durst segment with political wag and social gadfly Will Durst, and a visit to the tweet sack to read your tweets and emails. The whole mess is brought to you by our friends at Henderson's Pants.
Trusted friends, are you part of the 99%? With tax season just around the corner, there's no better time to hitch up your britches and occupy a pair of Henderson's accountant's pants. Created by Henderson's Pants CFO Samuel Grifter to keep track of the company's then meager finances right after the stock market crash of 1929, these trousers have a series of interlocking rear pockets made for storing and sorting receipts, invoices, and financial records of every kind. Perfect for day-to-day purchases as well as those one-time big-ticket items. Just pop the paperwork in the patented paper pusher in the back of every pair of Henderson's accountant's pants, and it is tucked away in the correct pocket every time. And these pants aren't just for keeping receipts in your seat. While you're taking care of business in the back, our deep pockets in the front are roomy enough to move all your money out of those giant banks and keep that folding green close to home. While there's no accounting for taste, you'll be cooking the books in style with your Henderson's accountant's pants. These trousers may be expensive, but even if you end up breaking the bank to buy a pair, they're made to tighten your belt automatically. And when tax time rolls around, there are no more forms to fill out. Just Drop trow and send your Henderson's accountant's pants to the IRS. From now on, instead of giving Uncle Sam the shirt off your back, you can give him the pants right off your ass. Originally designed for Black Friday, Bernie Madoff, and national bankers who have trouble keeping their pants on, Henderson's accountant's pants are available wherever the 1% are making a mockery of capitalism. That's Henderson's, makers of fine trousers and pantaloons since 1783. And now back to Succotash.
Thank you, Bill Haywatt. I wanted to do a quick shout out to our associate producer, Tyson Sainer. I've got an arsenal full of podcast clips that Tyson has harvested, and I will be unleashing them in the next edition of this very Soundcast. I also wanted to let you know that Tyson has teamed up with a big Soundcast listener and supporter of our show, Hunter Block, and they're bringing you a show of their very own. That's right, it's called The Antisocial Show, and it's up on SoundCloud. I don't think they've put it up on iTunes yet, but you can certainly find it on SoundCloud, and I will link it through this episode's show blog at succotashshow.com, so you can find your way to the Antisocial Show a little easier. And in the next episode of this show, I'll play a clip of their show. How about that? All right, let's pop the cork on the latest Burst O' Durst.
Hey guys, Will Durst here with a few choice words about the president. And yes, we're talking about him again. You want to know why? Because every day there's something. Every single day the doomsday clock inches forward a few seconds. And living on the West Coast makes it even scarier because we always wake up wondering what fresh hell has gone down already. He's had a 3-hour head start on lighting the fuse to Armageddon. Recently, the president held a press conference where he disputed logic and math. Talking about his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, who retired after 24 days, an excruciatingly long 24 days, Trump said the intelligence leaks that revealed Russian connections were criminal, but the news about them was fake. Anything he doesn't like gets labeled fake news. He's jumped on the phrase like an old dog with a new chew toy. Arr, arr, arr. Fake news, fake news. He repeats it so much he runs the risk of becoming known as the fake news president. Pretty soon, we won't need the news in that phrase. He continually holds the press to a standard he refuses to live up to. Said he had more electoral votes than anybody since Reagan, which is true only if you don't include Clinton, George H.W. Bush, or Obama, 3 of the 4 presidents since Reagan. When a reporter pointed out the discrepancy, T-Rump said, well, that's what someone told me. He went on to call his administration a finely tuned machine, which certainly sounds better than out-of-control dumpster fire, but might perhaps be a tad less accurate. Whatever kind of machine he's talking about, you don't want any kids around it. T-Rump also says he knows stuff that nobody else does. Can't imagine what it might be, but fairly certain we can rule out anything algebraically based. For Succotash, the Comedy Soundcast Soundcast, I'm Will Durst.
Discover more of Will's material and upcoming appearances on his home site, willdurst.com, or follow him on Twitter at Will Durst. I'll be back with whatever might be floating around in the tweet sack, as well as our cavalcade of gratitude after my visit with the friendly, fast, and funny Jimmy Pardo. Welcome to the show, Jimmy Pardo, a legend in podcast land, if I may.
I'll take it. Thank you. That's very kind of you.
I've been doing Succotash for almost 6 years come April.
Okay.
But you have been doing this a long time as podcasting goes.
It'll be 11 years come April. So, yeah.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, we got in when nobody knew what a podcast really was. There was, I guess tech podcasts were pretty popular, but as far as comedy goes, people knew Ricky Gervais, his podcast, and but otherwise, I don't. The Onion had one, but my co-host now of 11 years, Matt Belknap, asked me if I wanted to do a podcast, and I said sure, and here we are.
That's amazing. So, Never Not Funny is the name of the podcast, and it's a great podcast. I've covered it several times for SplitSider.com and Huffington Post, right, and whatnot. And you and I have met a couple times at the podcast festival in LA in passing.
Am I friendly to you? I'm always concerned when people say that we've done that. I make sure I'm always panicked that I'm not rude or dismissive. Please tell me I was not rude or dismissive.
You aren't, because the times we've met, I normally hold down a corner in the podcast lab. So when you enter that room, you seem to realize that you'll be speaking with people. So I don't know if you are rude on a normal basis, but you're always quite friendly in that particular context.
Listen, I think I'm friendly all the time, but I think in situations like that where, but you're right. If you're in that room, I'm geared to somebody's going to chit chat with you. But when you're in the hallway or whatever, walking through like a podcast festival like that or any sort of comedy festival, it's like, and you're met with so many different people, you can't give everybody the 3 minutes they want, but you can give them 2 minutes. But if you give them 2 minutes, they're like, "Hey, that guy was rude to me." So that's, it's like I'm just trying to go to the bathroom. Give me a break, brother.
You and I have actually a number of comedy friends in common.
Walk me through them. I'll give you my opinion of them in one word. Who do we have?
Well, an awful lot of people. Everyone from Rick Overton to Patton Oswalt to
hate him.
Matt Weinhold to.
I don't hate Pat. Well, I don't hate Patton. I just made that for humor. These are all great people.
Yeah. And because I've been I started out in the comedy booking side of the industry back in 1980.
Oh, good Lord!
Yeah, I used to book. I worked with Fox Productions in San Francisco, and we booked the Punchline. I was the general manager at the Comedy Underground in Seattle between 82 and 85. So
wow.
I've been around a while.
Yeah, boy, oh boy. I'm surprised. Your voice doesn't make you sound that old.
Well, that's good.
And that's, I was going to guess based on you saying Overton and Patton and Weinhold, if you were based out of San Francisco. I only worked for the Fox Productions a couple of times when they had that room in Reno.
Oh, yeah. The Just for Laughs room.
Yeah. And where you could literally get on Reno Air for like $40 and fly there. And I was the first time I ever worked there, I also got my first pilot, which was a show called Looking Up at the Nightly News with Gary Coleman, who is now since passed on. Yeah. The premise was, get this, it's the news done from the point of view of what's about? I don't want to say short people because that seems insulting to even me. But that was the premise. Like all the news people were not tall in stature, which of course you can't tell at all when you put them behind a desk giving the news. So it was kind of a daily show before the Daily Show, but it was done again. The premise was not everybody is tall. And so I had to do shows in Reno at night and then rehearse 3 times during the week for that pilot, but flights were only $40 or whatever. So it was basically just like jumping on now it would be an Uber, jumping on an Uber, but it was a plane to fly back and forth between Reno and LA. And I felt like this is show business. Yeah. Here we go, baby.
Man, that approach to Reno Airport is something. I don't know if you remember, but
it's just like a drop, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, was this the Just for Laughs room that was right next to the airport in the Hilton? I think it was, or the Hyatt.
It was in a casino.
Yeah.
And it ended up. I think Bud Freeman ended up turning it into an improv at one point. But it was. I remember the casino had you could hit golf balls out into a lake. And again, I thought it was exciting show business, but I think if I'm not mistaken, I think my shows in Reno sucked, and I'm pretty sure the pilot sucked. So, but boy, I felt like a big shot for a week.
And consistent, yeah, which is good.
Darn right. I'm not going to let anybody feel good about the project.
Now, how long have you been doing stand-up?
I started my first open mic. Well, I did a couple open mics right after I turned 21 in 1986. And then for whatever reason, maybe I wasn't ready or whatever, I felt overwhelmed. I bailed on it, and then I returned about a year later in October of 88 is when I started really doing open mics full-time. My first paid gig was in March of 89. I quit my day job in July of 89, and I've been doing it as my job ever since.
That's great. Now, when you started Never Not Funny, because a lot of comics obviously have gotten into podcasting. I think they do it for various reasons. Was there a particular reason why you wanted to jump into it in terms of doing it sort of alongside your comedy career?
It was, I mean, the cool hip thing to say is that I was between TV jobs, which makes me sound like I work all the time. But it kind of was the truth. I kind of wasn't doing anything. I was doing these live shows at the UCB Theater here in Los Angeles. I was doing like non-televised talk shows and game shows and that sort of thing, which I loved doing. I would still do them if it wasn't all the work outside of that, having to prep them and all that stuff. It gets a little tedious. But Matt Belknap, who I mentioned earlier, was just a fan of mine, and he was running that specialthing.com website. I don't know if you remember that. That celebrated alternative comedy, quote unquote. And he had done he was doing like a kind of an inside the comics mind sort of podcast, and he came to my house with his co-host, and they interviewed me, and it was very dry, talking about the craft of stand-up, which I enjoyed. And then when it was over, he said, I think I'd have a heck of a lot more fun producing a podcast for you. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And, people always told me that I should do a blog online or, back in the day where everybody was trying to, you got to drive people back to your website. You got to get people's eyes, and your dates aren't going to do enough. You got to get them to go there. And people always kept telling me to write a blog. And whenever I write, it literally sounds like a child doing a journal entry. It's horrible. And I don't know how to be funny in them. I don't know how to do any of it. So when he said do this podcast, I literally just saw it as, hey, this might be a way to do like a journal, but an audio journal, and we'll see what happens. And as I've said over the years, I was the last guy on MySpace. I was the last guy on Facebook. I've only been on Twitter 3 years. I'm the last guy on that. So when he said to do this podcast thing, I thought, you know what? Why not? I don't want this time to be the time where I say nah, and then what ends up happening, every other comedian has a podcast. I'm like, son of a bitch, why did I do it?
Yes.
So I kind of was my quote unquote cute way of saying it is, I was following by leading. I didn't want to be left behind on something that I didn't even know would take off, so I started doing it first.
That's great. That's great.
If that makes sense. First of my group of people. I know people always put my feet to the fire whenever somebody says, you're the first. It's like, I realize I wasn't the first, but we all know what the F I mean.
Well, one of the things about getting in there early, I think, was because before it completely exploded, was you were able to actually start a subscriber base, which a lot of podcasters these days would be very, very jealous of, I'm sure, because it's so dang hard to try and bring in any money.
It was a blessing and a curse. It made sense at the time. And by the way, let me say that it's 70% blessing. Let's make no mistake. It was kind of the podcast, the comedy podcast boom hadn't happened yet. So I and Matt, we were like, well, why are we doing this? We kind of felt like, yes, we have a loyal fan base, and yes, we're having fun doing it, which, by the way, are two great reasons to do it. So it sounds like I'm bitching about something, but it was still kind of like, we kind of felt like losers doing this thing like on cable access, like just some stupid show that, like, why are we doing? Why are we playing pretend radio for these people? So we said, let's try doing a pay format, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, we'll bail on this thing because podcasting isn't taking off anyway. So we went to a pay model. We were told to go F ourselves by a lot of people that we didn't understand the internet, and how dare we try to make money. But then maybe I'll use the number again, maybe 70% of the people that were listening to us said, yeah, we'll pay you for this. We love it. And so it worked out great. And then while we're behind this paywall, the comedy podcast boom happened where, here's, Ackerman and Hardwick and Marin and, all these other ones that are out there. And they all came along. And so we went from being like a top 5 podcast to kind of not even being mentioned anymore, because we were behind this paywall and nobody knew was joining us. Everybody, we had our great fan base. We were making money. but then, nobody, everybody's going to these other podcasts, and nobody was coming to Never Not Funny. And eventually we figured that out. We joined Earwolf, several years later. But,
right.
But yes, I agree. I know, again, long-windedly, I gave you an answer of why we went to a pay model.
No, it's great. It's great. It made perfect sense at the time, which is fantastic.
And to speak to what you said, it made sense at the time, and then it eventually hurt us because we were behind the eight ball. But now I think in the long run, it goes to what you said of like everybody wishes they could monetize the podcast by making what was a great idea, then a mistake, is actually turns out to be a great idea in the long run. So
you end up winning. You're a winner.
Well, I'm a winner for that my wife and my son. Those are my three things.
As a stand-up comic, as I've seen you work a number of times, and just seeing you in conversation and hearing you on your show, you're really fast. But do you have any improv background at all?
Right out of high school, I went to Second City in Chicago and studied there for that summer, whatever that summer program would have been, or whatever they called it at the time. And that was it. I think I learned more about show business than improvising, to be honest. I don't know if maybe I learned yes-anding, but we're talking 30-something years ago, so I don't remember everything. But
sure.
I think this is just who I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean that yes, because I've been doing improv for 30 years, and you definitely have that yes and ingrained in your responses. I think it's like you never really negate. You jump right in. So it's fascinating to see, because I've often talked to stand-ups when I was running the club and things like that. That improv is a great tool to have in your back pocket, even if you're a stand-up, just because it makes you quicker and you can respond faster.
I think so, but I think there's also stand-ups that shouldn't do it. They know how to craft a great joke. They're a great wordsmith, and I know so often they'll see me, or they'll see Todd Glass, or Jimmy Brogan, or guys that Big J Okerson now, who I don't really know, but I've seen him work, and he's very funny, and he too does a lot of improvising. I think they see us and they'll go, I should probably take some improv classes so I could be like those guys. You don't need to be like us. Be like you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you started the Pardcast-a-thon, which is a fundraiser. This is the 8th annual, coming up on March 4th, right?
Yes, sir.
And what started you doing this? Is just so people know, this is to raise money for the Smile Train charity. And you can tell us a little bit more about that in a minute. But what got you started doing this as a fundraiser? It may, truthfully, it may have been self-serving to begin with. It may have been, hey, let's do a long show. Let's do a marathon show for the fun of it. And then we're like, yeah, but we need a reason to do this. We can't just, hey, we're going to be doing a long show. And we had just done a thing on Never Not Funny where we auctioned off, just by coincidence, Pat Francis, who now has his own podcast called Rock Solid. He and I both had donated to Smile Train the day before he came on Never Not Funny as a guest. And we presented the idea to the audience of, hey, whoever, donates enough money to this auction, which all the proceeds will go to Smile Train, will get to come on Never Not Funny as a guest. So it was me and Pat and Francis, and then, of course, my co-host Matt Belknap, and so, on that episode. And so when it came time to do this marathon show, we said, well, hey, we had that success with that auction with Smile Train. I believe in that organization. Why don't we do it as a telethon, which I always grew up loving. I loved as a kid sitting on Labor Day weekend. Yeah.
And this can make me the saddest kid in the world, but for 48 hours sitting in my house watching Steve and Edie sing at 3 a.m. I always found that fascinating. Or what crap act got 5:30 in the morning and has to keep it entertaining for the people that are at home that are happen to stumble across this to donate money to Jerry's kids. And I kind of wanted that vibe. So we when we first started, we did it from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. To kind of just do that overnight thing and to get, giddy in the morning and blah, blah, blah. And so that was really what started it on Smile Train. And, we raised about $6,000 that first year. And then last year, it's gone up every single year. And we raised $184,000 last year. And all told now, I think we're close to $800,000 that we've raised for these guys.
Wow, that's amazing.
And very quickly, because you alluded to it, Smile Train is, and Pat and Matt and I had the opportunity to go down to Mexico and watch them perform a procedure and meet some of the families last year. Each surgery, what they do is they go to third world cities and they fix the cleft lips or cleft palates of kids and sometimes adults that can't otherwise afford to have the surgery. And the surgery, because the doctors and the staff, they all donate their time, the surgery only takes 45 minutes and only costs $250, which is what attracted me to their ad. It said, for $250, you could change a child's life. And my head understood that. It didn't feel like I'm just throwing money into research or whatever, which, by the way, is all great. I'm not dismissing any of that. But this was like you see the before and after of a child, and it's like, wow, for $250, I could make this kid's life better?
Wow,
done.
Yeah. That's amazing.
And so that's kind of why it answered. And Smile Train kind of came, when they eventually became aware of what we were doing for them, and they asked me for a quote, it sounded cheesy, but it was kind of like, we're both in the business of putting smiles on people's faces. Me as this clown comedian and them as these wonderful doctors doing great work. So it just seemed like a perfect fit.
That's great. That's great. And you've had a great range of guests over the years you've been doing it. Just from the information I got, you've had Conan O'Brien and Sarah Silverman and Patton Oswalt, and John Hamm, and on and on. The list goes on and on. Any teasers as to who you have coming up this year?
I believe we have some sort of agreement with the AV Club to do they have an exclusive on the guest list this year.
I see.
So
okay.
I don't know if I'm allowed to give teasers, but a lot of the regulars will be back. That's a good way to say that.
Okay.
And another way, in the past, Sarah Silverman has been very gracious with her time, and I believe she's made 5 of the 7 we've done so far, Sarah has been a part of.
Wow.
And so one would hope she'd be there again this year. And people like Conan O'Brien and John Hamm both donate if they're in town, they have graciously shown up. And if they're not in town, they will call in and we'll FaceTime with them and, or we'll do a video with them or something will happen where, again, everybody is very gracious with their time, and if they are not there in person, most likely they will call in. Hopefully,
that's great. That's great. Has the podcast Never Not Funny? Do you think it's given you sort of more range and distance than you would have gotten had you just kind of stuck to just doing stand-up?
Oh, no question, and it's night and day. And I hope I'm answering your question. When I go to the clubs now, most of the audience knows who I am.
Yeah.
Whereas before the podcast, and even though I had some late night exposure and hosted game shows and stuff on television, it still was like, please welcome Jimmy Pardo, and I kind of got to convince that audience that I'm funny. Now they're coming to see me, and I'm going to clubs that were outside of my world. There was people that booked me consistently, and I was grateful for it. And but then the podcast, people started asking their clubs, when are you going to get Jimmy Pardo, and on and on. And then eventually I'm working new clubs. And so, yeah, it's I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
Was that your question?
Yeah. That's part of it. And also just in terms of sort of your call it your sort of sphere of not really influence, but just in terms of, if you're just looking at the guest list of who you've had on the show before or in the past, would these people have sort of would you have been on their radar had it not been for the popularity of Never Not Funny?
Boy, that's a great question. I don't know. I knew a lot of these people because of, my shows at the UCB. Mm-hmm. But then, Richard Lewis and I, we have not become the best friends that I, in my younger comedic days, thought I would be with Richard. But when I met Richard and I had lunch with him, with a mutual friend, and I was like, hey, why don't you come on my podcast? It gave me a way to then do something creative with one of my heroes, which I wouldn't have had that opportunity, otherwise.
Yeah. And what other things are you involved with these days besides the show and doing your stand-up? Still going out for like TV stuff, things like that?
Yeah, I've had, the last, I started in 2009 working at the Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien as his opening act, or, the warm-up comic as it's more commonly known. I said opening act mainly for my ego. And also, I didn't feel like they never treated me like a warm-up act. They treated me like a guy that went out and I got to do my time, and then I was done. I didn't have to hold hands and throw out candy bars and do all that nonsense. But I started there in 2009, so that was 5 days a week. That was at the Tonight Show, and then it was 4 days a week when we moved over to TBS. So there really wasn't time to, I wasn't doing a lot of acting to begin with. I would probably get one role every couple of years. But I had to stop doing all the auditioning for acting, and then even hosting auditioning, I had to stop. And I was grateful to have the gig with Conan, which was the greatest thing that ever happened, other than the podcast. Meeting Conan and having Andy Richter recommend me for that job was the greatest thing to happen, because every day I get to go to work with the funniest people in the world, and I've got this consistent paycheck. And my agent, TJ Markwalter, my personal appearance agent, said to me, hey, Jim, it's only a matter of, when I first got the job, there's only a matter of time before they realize how funny you are, and they'll start using you more. And sure enough, he was right. They started using me in remotes and in sketches, and then eventually I was like, I'm a guest on there once or twice a year. And then Andy Richter had to miss a couple of shows. They asked me to fill in for Andy. So that was all great stuff. And so everything else kind of went by the wayside, because I had finally a full-time job in Hollywood, granted mostly behind the scenes, but I'm working.
Right.
And going out and doing some stand-up. And then, boy, it's 2 years already now. I got the job hosting, didn't even have to audition. They offered me to host a show called Race to Escape that was on Science Channel, which was a great show about escape rooms. And sadly, we only got one season, but because I got that job, I had to miss some Conan tapings, and it was ridiculous that I was trying to do both. And it was, time to, hey, you've been hired now to star in your own show. Maybe it's time to move on from Conan. And it just so happened that, Conan and all those people over there were kind of feeling like, I had outgrown my role there. And so, yeah, 2 years, I think it's 2 years ago, maybe even this week, that I left my full-time job with Conan, but I have a development deal with them, and so we are out pitching, quote-unquote, the Jimmy Pardo Show in whatever format that network wants to see me dance.
Is there a thought that I think you guys do a video feed of Never Not Funny, don't you?
Oh, of course, yeah. We have, if I'm not mistaken, we have about 7 too many cameras providing that feed.
Is there ever the thought that the Jimmy Pardo Show on TV would be a version of Never Not Funny, essentially?
Well, that would be, that in an ideal world, yes. I think we are not unlike the late 80s, early 90s, where everybody tried to compete with Johnny Carson during his last days. I think we are oversaturated with talk shows at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that is hurting guys like me, and I'm not alone. There's other talented guys that could host a talk show or host a chat roundtable. And I think we're just kind of getting lost in the sea of Jimmys on late night.
Yeah, on TV, but it's kind of interesting because I think Chelsea Handler has now a sort of a talk show, I guess, on, I think, is it Amazon? I can't remember.
I think it's Netflix.
So it seems like there's this whole other realm now that's opening up with streaming that talk shows really haven't started to pierce yet, which is kind of interesting because it is sort of the joining of, it's sort of I guess you could say it's a hybrid of almost podcasting and television because it's so sort of niche and people have to want to go see it. It's not like it's being broadcast into their homes,
Yeah, it's and so that to that end, we're kind of already doing that, we're already providing that, like you said, the video feed, and people are subscribing to watch the video. Now, granted, that's limited, again, going back to kind of the paywall thing from earlier, but, but if Netflix or somebody came to us or, with a decent offer, obviously we'd 100% have to consider it and probably would welcome it.
Right. What about getting back to the sort of the world of podcasts, which has become, when you started, there was, like you said, there was a handful of comedy shows, if that. Now there are literally over 100,000 comedy podcasts out there. And it's
crazy.
There's over 300,000 podcasts about every subject, whether it's science or TV shows or whatever they are. And so what does that feel like from where you started in the podcast industry to where it is now? Do you sense that sort of overwhelming amount of content now?
I do, and it comes from, I've been on both sides of this. Where when I started this, and when we first started, we had a guest on every 4 episodes. That was the premise, because at the time we had a third guy that was there consistently named Mike Schmidt, who has his own podcast now, the 40-Year-Old Boy.
Yeah.
So it was me, Matt, and Mike. And for the first year, we'd have a guest on every 4 episodes. And whenever I would ask somebody to do the podcast, they were like, "What? What does that even mean?" And like I said, and then going back to like that fake radio thing, like they would come to my house, we'd be at my dining room table, and we're doing like it again. It felt like kids doing an impression of radio. It was weird, and but then it was fun, and everybody, we were like, "Hey, that was a great time. And you treat it like a radio show, Jimmy, and we love it." So it went from me asking people to do the podcast and them not knowing what the hell I was asking them to do, to then like even the first time when Conan did it. Which he was gracious enough to do it when he was hosting The Tonight Show. And it was his way of letting me know, I guess, that, he really enjoyed what I was doing on the show and that I was part of the team. But he didn't know what a podcast was, and because nobody did.
Yeah.
And so he's like, "Yeah, I'll do it." And he came to our studio, and it was very fun. And then there was a little time there where, okay, we're asking people to do a podcast, and people are still into it. Now when when people go, "What do you do for a living?" And it's like, "Well, I have a podcast." "Oh yeah, my cousin's got one, and this guy's got one." And it's like, no, you don't get it. I have a podcast. Your cousin has a hobby. I got in 11 years ago. But in their mind, and they're not wrong. In their mind, we're no different.
Yeah.
It's very odd. It's a strange, or to ask somebody, "Hey, you want to do my podcast?" And you could just see their eyes roll back in their head like, "Oh, here's another a-hole asking me to be on his podcast." Where it was kind of special for a while to, "Yeah, I'll come and do that. That sounds neat." Whereas now it's like, "Oh, I'm pretty booked up, and what are your numbers? We can't have him come over if your numbers aren't great, or your number. Are you getting Mark Maron numbers?" No, yeah. Nobody is.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, it's so. Yeah, you experienced the same thing. It's a pain in the ass, and but you know what? As I always say, we have our people, our regulars, regular guests that people love, and whatever we can sprinkle that in with. We don't try to compete by getting the famous people, but if a famous person happens to come on our show, great. But you know what? We've gotten just as great a response on famous people as we have with people like, I keep going back to Pat Francis, who nobody knew who that was. He was just my funny friend who I knew from stand-up.
Yeah.
And people loved him, or, Paul Gilmartin, or at the time, Paul F. Tompkins, who had a little bit of, recognition factor, but, more people learned about him from my podcast. So I'm grateful that we have that we could bring back guys like Rich Sommer, who's a character actor, but he's wonderfully funny and great.
Yeah. Exactly.
And we don't have to rely on, famous people in order to, keep our numbers up.
No, what's interesting because, I get to interview occasionally, big people, like just because I'm friends with like Dana Carvey. So he's been on the show 3 times, or 4 times. But normally I'm talking to either their podcasters or comedians or sometimes directors or whoever they are. It doesn't really matter. It's just entertaining people. Right.
Right.
And it feels like we're providing a platform for this sort of lower tier of people that other people should know, that the public should know, and they don't get any exposure. They don't get to go on the talk shows. They don't get to, show up where Joe Public is going to see them. So I think podcasting does provide this service where we're exposing listeners to some people they should know.
I think so too, and I know that a lot of and I'm not going to throw names around because I don't want them to think that I don't think they're famous. Yeah. But I've had people, that, I'll use my friend Ellis Paul, the musician, as a great example. Mm-hmm. I didn't know Ellis Paul. I was a fan of Ellis Paul. I would go to see him whenever he would come to L.A. I would go to see him in concert, and I believe even on one of our very first episodes, season 1, almost 11 years ago, I said, man, this guy's music, speaks to me, and I wish one day I could be friends with Ellis Paul. Well, then years go by, and he's just a folk singer. And I don't mean just in the pejorative. Yeah. He's a singer-songwriter who I think is brilliant, who has a following, but he's not a household name. And I invited him on my podcast. He came on. He and I hit it off. He and his manager, we all hit it off, and Ellis and I have become friends. But the whole reason I bring it up is Ellis will always say it doesn't matter what town he's going to now, at least one person, which is crazy in the world of folk music, at least one person will come up and say, I'm only here because I heard you on Never Not Funny. Wow. And so that's in the folk world. And so it's also going into comedy and, where people are saying to me, hey, you know what? I never even heard of you, but then I heard you on Jimmy Pardo's podcast, thought you were hysterical, and now I came to see you at Helium in St. Louis. that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I know. I basically just repeated what you said in a lot of different words and plugged Ellis Paul.
Well, I'm going to see if I can get him on as a guest now. It's exciting.
You know what? I think you should because he's brilliantly talented, and he's also fascinating, and he's another guy who He's always. I don't want to. He's won amazing awards for his music and stuff like that. So when I'm comparing myself to him, it's like I only say that because we're both in our fields, and this will be the most arrogant that I'll ever sound. We're both so well respected within our fields, and we're to be considered a comics comic and whatever. But yet I'm not a household name, and I've achieved a lot, and I'm grateful for all my success. But I'm still like, not everybody knows who I am. And Ellis is the same way in music. Like he's this guy who is just he's second to none. His peers all like, well, who's the best worker right now? Ellis Paul. Like they say it without a hesitation. Yeah. So our careers have just paralleled so much in these different worlds. So for that reason, you should have him on and bring up that I mentioned this and make him feel like crap about himself.
That's hilarious. So let's talk about the Pardcast-a-thon again before
sure.
our time runs out here. So you got.
Oh, are we running tight on time? We got to whatever time you need.
No. I don't want to use up your morning, and I think.
And you're sick of it. I get it.
No. I could talk to you for hours. In fact, I hope you'll come back on just to chat at length again. I get down to LA fairly frequently, and it would be great to talk to you, in person in the room.
100% agree with that.
Phone. But let's make sure people know about the 8th annual Pardcast-a-thon. It's coming up March 4th, and it runs from noon till midnight Pacific Standard Time.
That's correct, and they could watch it on nevernotfunny.com. Mm-hmm. It all streams live there. It also there'll be a donation button there. So you can donate to Smile Train. We also have a bunch of auctions. There'll be a button on the front page for that as well. We do auctions like, go to lunch with Jimmy and Matt, go to a concert with Pat Francis. What else have we done? Go golfing. And then the celebrities all bring, not all, some, are nice enough to bring, like Rich Sommer will bring, or John Hamm will bring a signed box set of Mad Men. Oh, okay. And then we auction that sort of thing off. And Doug Benson also always donates, be a guest on Doug's podcasts. And, his doper fans are nice enough to donate a lot of money to spend some time with Doug. So people are very generous with their time as well as these experiences that we auction off. And quite frankly, we make a lot of money for Smile Train through these auctions.
That's great. And so there's also a YouTube channel, I think, that you'll be able to watch the Pardcast-a-thon on too.
The fact that I'm starting to do these interviews, I probably should learn what that is. To me, it's just always easier to steer people towards nevernotfunny.com because I know that answer. But yeah, it's on Jash, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Well, cool. Jimmy, it's been a pleasure to talk to you away from the swirl of the podcast festival madness.
Which is always fun, right?
I love it. I kickstarted the very first one, and have gone every year since. And last year they actually started using me. I was moderating a panel on journalism and podcasting, and I love those guys, and I love it.
Let me ask you a question, and obviously you could edit any of this out. When they do the panels at those things, is the turnout decent? Because I'm always busy doing a show. I never get a chance to pop my head in those. Are they fun, and are they the turnout good?
Yeah, ours. I mean, I don't go to a lot of them because I'm usually in the podcast lab. But ours turned out there was a lot of folks there. I was really surprised, because they always put it in like a tiny room that's like away from everything else. So I'm surprised people can't even find their way there. But I found, my guests were really very thoughtful about journalism. I had the two women the host and the producer from this podcast only been out for about a year, called Criminal, which is they look at these real crime stories. And then a guy who's a tech editor for, I think it's one of the publications in L.A. I can't remember which one now, but I found it very interesting. We got into some really interesting discussions about how podcasting has affected journalism, the precepts of journalism, how it works. There's no kind of stopgaps of having editors and copy editors and things like that. So it's become kind of crazy.
That's great. I'm thrilled. Like I said, I never get a chance to pop in there because, I'm avoiding talking to people in the hallway, and then I'm doing a show.
Yeah, exactly. Jimmy, this has been great, and appreciate your time, and look forward to tuning in, if we can still use that term for podcast.
I still will.
To the Pardcast-a-thon, and again, love to see you in person and chat it up when I get to LA next time.
I would love to. Please contact me to do that, and I appreciate you having me on today, and all the stuff you've done for in the past for Splitsider and now HuffPo and all that nonsense.
My pleasure. You have yourself a great week.
You too. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Jimmy. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to Jimmy for taking the time to chat with me. Don't forget to catch the 8th annual Pardcast-a-thon coming up this Saturday, March 4th. Easiest way to get there, nevernotfunny.com. It starts at noon, ends at midnight, and it's all to benefit a great cause, Smile Train. All right, it's Tweet Sack time. Hiya, Tweety. I won't lie to you. The Tweet Sack has been looking a little thin of late. No, not thin, sickly. Which is fine, really. If you've got nothing to ask of me or say to me via the electronic message platforms, that's your business. But until I begin hearing more from listeners, I may be retiring this segment. In fact, you know what? That's just what I'm going to do, starting right now. Get in there, Tweety. Sorry, bud. I'll let you out once we start getting some emails or some really important tweets. But we will continue to enjoy our cavalcade of gratitude every episode, where I thank you for mentioning Succotash in your tweets, retweets, follows, likes, hearts, thumbs up, etc. If you mentioned us, we'll do our best to mention you, and it goes a little something like this. Podcast Whore, JPrice02, Let's Chat, Laughable. Hey, have I told you that Succotash is available on the Laughable app? That's right. You can find us there right now. Oh, you're listening to us right now. Never mind. Podcast Booster Bot, Stories Podcast, Ice in the Face, Amanda Bynes, or Binez, Spare Min, Illusionoid, Rapture Insurance, Cassiopeia, Dale Seaver, We Got This, Jersey Comic New, Rowdy City, In Poor Taste, Reed Santini, Maxie Croning, John Ponder, Changes in Latitude, Dave Nelson, Dustin Jacobs, Dino Keltz, Cynthia Raymond, Thrifty, Dave in the Cave, Podcast Madness, Salty Language Podcast, Dan Taberski, Missing Richard Simmons, Tiger and Sacco Jones, Chris Daniels, The Slant, Neil Modi, David Frey, Ed Wallach, Penny Carr, Strange Times Podcast, Davian Dent, Christine Blackburn, Man from Another Place, Beck Yak Angler, Minutia Men, See, Here's the Thing, Corky Knievel, Platypus Podcasting, and Bay Area Comedy. And that, my friends, is pretty much that. The best way for you to help to pass the Succotash is to let your friends and family know that they can get it in a ton of different places. The Laughable app, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, our Facebook page, Overcast, Podbay, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and even right from our home site at succotashshow.com. Okay, Epi148 is toast. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Succotash, the Comedy Soundcast Soundcast, with your host, Marc Hershon. Brought to you by Henderson's Pants and...
Imagine your company's name right here.
Find us on the web at succotashshow.com, on iTunes, on Stitcher Smart Radio, on SoundCloud, and on the Laughable app. You can also hear us streaming and like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Succotash Show. Email us at
marc@succotashshow.com.
or call into the Succotash hotline at our non-toll-free call number, 818-921-7212.
That number again is 818-921-7212.
You can also upload clips from your favorite comedy soundcasts directly to us using our direct upload link at hightail.com/you/Succotash. Succotash is produced and engineered with the kind assistance of Joe Paulino through the auspices of Studio P Sausalito, home of the hit. Our associate producer is Tyson Sainer. Our musical director is Scott Carvey. Our booth assistant is Kenny Durges. Until next time, I am your loyal booth announcer, Bill Haywatt, reminding you to please pass the Succotash. Goodbye.